He walked in carrying his daughter's hand and a sealed envelope that could destroy a $1 billion empire. And they threw him out like garbage. A single father in a worn jacket. A man nobody looked at twice. But Ethan Cole wasn't asking for charity. He was the only person standing between Victoria Sterling and the worst mistake of her life. And she had 30 seconds to sign it away forever. If you've ever been judged before you opened your mouth, stay until the end, like this video. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The elevator doors opened onto the 43rd floor, and Ethan Cole stepped out into a world that wasn't built for him. He felt it immediately. The way the receptionist's eyes moved from his face to his jacket, and back again in the time it takes to blink. The slight recalibration in her posture. The decision she made about him before he'd taken 3 steps across the marble floor. He'd been assessed and categorized before he'd said a single word. He knew that look. He'd seen it before in other places, under different circumstances. But it had never stung quite like this, because this time his daughter was holding his hand. Lily was 6 years old and wearing her good sneakers, the ones with the small purple stars on the sides that she'd picked out herself at the end of summer sale. She was looking around the lobby with the wide-open curiosity of a child who has never been told that certain rooms aren't for certain people, and Ethan squeezed her hand once, gently, a reassurance, and made himself keep walking. The lobby of Sterling Harbor's corporate headquarters was the kind of space designed to communicate a single message. You are small, and we are not. 40-foot ceilings, a waterfall feature along the east wall that served no purpose except to make noise that sounded expensive. The furniture was cream-colored and angular, the kind of furniture that costs money to look uncomfortable. Behind a curved reception desk the size of a small boat, a young woman in a fitted blazer watched Ethan approach with the specific patience of someone who had been trained to be polite, while also being absolutely certain she was about to turn someone away. "Good morning," she said. Her name tag read Donna. "Morning." Ethan stopped at the desk. He didn't lean on it. He stood straight, not aggressively, just straight. "I need to speak with Victoria Sterling." Dana's expression didn't change. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." A pause, a small practiced smile. "Ms. Sterling's schedule is completely full today. If you'd like, I can connect you with her assistant's office and they can—" "I understand she's busy," Ethan said. "I'm asking for 5 minutes. My name is Ethan Cole. She won't recognize it, but if you can get a message to her legal team, they'll know who I am." Dana looked at him. The jacket, worn at both elbows. The slight tiredness around his eyes that came from too many nights of too little sleep. The little girl standing beside him, swinging their joined hands slowly because she'd spotted the waterfall and was trying not to stare at it openly. Dana picked up her phone. Ethan turned slightly and crouched to Lily's level. "You okay?" "That water thing is really big," Lily said, not quite whispering. "Yeah." "Is it a fountain?" "More or less." "Do you make a wish?" "I don't think that's what it's for." Lily considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "That seems like a waste." Ethan almost smiled. He straightened up as Dana set the phone down. "Mr. Cole, I've passed your name along to Miss Sterling's executive assistant. She'll be with you in a moment." The tone suggested the moment would be long and the outcome would be predictable. He nodded and moved to stand to one side, out of the flow of foot traffic. Assistants and junior associates moving through the lobby in clusters. The occasional senior executive striding past with the practiced authority of someone who has forgotten what it felt like to have to wait for anything. A few of them glanced at Ethan. None of them stopped. Lily pressed against his side and slipped her hand back into his. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Why are we here?" He thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being something she'd have to carry. "I have to show someone some paperwork," he said. "Important paperwork." "The envelope?" "Yeah." "Can I see what's inside it?" "Not yet." She accepted this without complaint, which was one of the things he loved about her. She'd always had a native patience that he recognized as something she got from her mother, not from him. He wasn't patient by nature. He was disciplined, which wasn't the same thing. Discipline was a choice you made over and over again. Patience was something you either had or you spent your whole life learning to fake. He'd been faking it for 3 years. He had. The executive assistant arrived 9 minutes later. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, with the compact efficiency of someone who managed 15 priorities at once and resented the addition of a 16th. Her name was Christine, and she did not offer her hand. Mr. Cole. She looked at him, then at Lily, then back at him with the briefest flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, or recalculation. I've been told you're requesting time with Ms. Sterling. 5 minutes, Ethan said, before the 11 o'clock signing. Christine's expression sharpened slightly. How do you know about the 11 o'clock? Because it's the thing I need to talk to her about. He kept his voice level. I'm not here to cause trouble. I have documents with me that her legal team needs to see before that acquisition is finalized. That's it. 5 minutes. Christine studied him in a way that was meant to be subtle and wasn't. He'd been studied before, by men trained to do it properly. And he'd learned how to hold still under the weight of it without giving anything away. He just stood there. Jacket, no tie, a sealed envelope under his arm, a 6-year-old in purple star sneakers standing beside him. Wait here, Christine said, and walked away without indicating how long here would mean. Lily looked up at him. She seemed grumpy. She's busy. You're busy too. Different kind of busy. Victoria Sterling had 17 minutes before she needed to be in the boardroom. She was standing at the window of her office on the 44th floor, looking down at the city and doing something she almost never allowed herself. She was trying to slow her own pulse. The view helped, usually. The city spread out in every direction, all those buildings and cars and lives too small to see from here. And it reminded her that most things were manageable if you looked at them from the right distance. But today the distance wasn't working. The acquisition had taken 14 months to negotiate. The Hargrove Group's medical technology division, real assets, real revenue, a foothold in a healthcare sector she'd been trying to break into for 2 years. Her CFO, Marcus Hale, had structured the deal himself, had brought it to her 6 months ago with projections that made the numbers sing. And she had trusted him because she'd hired him to know things she didn't, and because in the 2 years since she'd taken over Sterling Harbor after her father's stroke, she hadn't had time to trust slowly. She was 30 years old, and she was running a company that employed 4,000 people, and she had not slept more than 5 hours in a row since March. Her phone buzzed. Christine, there's a man downstairs requesting 5 minutes with you before the signing, Ethan Cole. Says it's about the Hargrove acquisition. He doesn't have an appointment. Victoria read the message twice. What does he look like? A pause. Then, not like someone who should know about the Hargrove acquisition. She almost replied, then stopped herself. She looked at the clock. 16 minutes. She thought about the stack of signed documents waiting in the boardroom. She thought about Marcus Hale, who had greeted her this morning with a handshake and the kind of smile people wear when they know something good is about to happen. She put the phone down without responding. She found out about Ethan Cole 4 minutes later, not from Christine but from her head of security, a former state trooper named Gareth, who knocked on her office door with the expression of a man delivering news he wasn't sure how to categorize. There's a situation in the lobby, he said. I know, the man asking for a meeting. He's still there. He's refusing to leave. Victoria turned from the window. He's refusing. Politely, Gareth said, which surprised her. He's not raising his voice, he's just standing there with a kid. A kid. A little girl, 6, maybe 7 years old. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, a cloud moved over the sun, and the light in the office shifted, went slightly gray. Send security down, she said. Have them escort him out. Professionally, I don't want a scene. Understood. And Gareth, he stopped in the doorway. Make sure the girl's okay, Bab. Ethan saw them coming. He'd seen enough situations develop to know what they looked like from the outside. The way a room reorganizes itself around an impending confrontation, subtle shifts in attention, people finding reasons to look elsewhere. 2 men in dark blazers crossed the lobby toward him with the measured pace of professionals who'd done this before. He felt Lily's hand tighten around his fingers. Dad, she said quietly. It's all right. He didn't say stay calm. He didn't need to. He just kept his hand loose in hers, easy, so she could feel that he wasn't afraid. The security guards, both of them bigger than him, one of them with a jaw like a piece of architecture, stopped 2 feet away. "Mr. Cole," the larger one said. His name tag read Simon. "We're going to need you to come with us." "I understand," Ethan said. He didn't move. "Before I do, I need you to understand something. The envelope I'm carrying is a legal instrument. If it's confiscated or damaged, the people in this building will have a problem much larger than me standing in the lobby. I'm telling you that as a courtesy." Simon blinked. It wasn't the response he'd prepared for. "Sir, you need to leave the premises." "I know," Ethan said. "I'm asking for 5 minutes with Ms. Sterling. 5 minutes. If she hears what I have to say and still wants me removed, I'll leave without a word." "That's not— Is there a reason you can't make that call?" Ethan asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. He looked at Simon without aggression, with the particular quality of attention he'd learned to cultivate in the years when reading a person's hesitation correctly could mean the difference between a good outcome and a terrible one. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you. I'm not here to cause trouble for anyone. I need 5 minutes." Simon glanced at his partner. Something passed between them. A wordless negotiation. Then Simon's radio crackled, and someone on the other end said 3 words. "Bring him up." Christine met them at the elevator on 43, and she brought them the rest of the way without explanation. Ethan carried Lily in his arms for the elevator ride because she'd gone quiet in the way she sometimes did when she was overwhelmed. Not crying, just taking stock of the world, storing things up. He felt her small hand resting against the back of his neck, and he focused on that single point of contact, the way he used to focus on a fixed point on the horizon when everything around him was moving too fast. Victoria Sterling's office was at the end of a hallway lined with framed photographs. The company's history condensed into a corridor, buildings breaking ground, handshakes, ribbon cuttings. Ethan noticed, as he passed, that the photographs stopped being black and white about 2/3 of the way down the hall, and that in the most recent ones, the face at the center kept changing. The office itself was large, but it was less intimidating than he'd expected. Less perfectly arranged, more used. There were papers on the desk that hadn't been stacked neatly, a half-drunk cup of coffee that had gone cold, a blazer draped over the back of the chair rather than hung up. Victoria Sterling stood at the window with her arms crossed and turned when they entered. She was younger than he'd expected, which he knew he shouldn't have been surprised by. He'd done his research. But there was something different about seeing it in person. She was also, he noticed, exhausted. It was in the set of her jaw, the way she was holding herself together with a specific kind of tension that he recognized. She looked at him the same way everyone else had. Then she looked at Lily. Something in her face changed, not softened exactly, but shifted. "Ms. Sterling," Ethan said. He set Lily down carefully. "Thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes," she said. Her voice was careful, controlled. "I don't know who you are or how you know about my acquisition, but I don't have time for— My name is Ethan Cole," he said. "My late wife was Margaret Cole. She worked in private financial oversight for 11 years before she passed away, and in the last 6 months of her life, she was tracking irregular financial activity connected to a company called Meridian Bridge Holdings." He watched her face. "I think that name means something to you." Victoria went very still. "Meridian Bridge is the parent company of the Hargrove Group," he said. "The company you're acquiring today. And the man who brokered this deal, your CFO, Marcus Hale, has a financial relationship with Meridian Bridge that he has not disclosed to this company, to your board, or to you." The room was very quiet. Lily had found a chair near the wall and climbed into it, and was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching everything with those dark, patient eyes. "That's a serious accusation," Victoria said. "Yes." Ethan held out the envelope. "Which is why I brought documentation." She didn't take it immediately. She stood there, and he could see her weighing it. The calculation of a person who had learned to be careful, who had learned that information offered unexpectedly almost always came with a cost. "Who are you?" she said. "Not your name. I mean, why are you here? Why does this involve you?" It was a fair question. It was the right question. He'd been dreading it, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was the one part of all of this that he couldn't say without it costing him something. My wife found this, he said. She was trying to figure out what to do with it when she got sick. She didn't have time to finish what she started. He paused. Not for effect, because it was genuinely hard to say the next part in front of a stranger. I've been sitting on this for 2 years. I sent it through the legal channels. I sent certified letters to your compliance office. I tried to go through intermediaries. Every time it got buried. He looked at her. So I came in person. Victoria looked at the envelope. She looked at him. She looked briefly at Lily sitting in the chair by the wall. She took the envelope. Christine, she said without raising her voice. The executive assistant appeared in the doorway instantly. Yes? Get Daniel from legal, right now, and push the 11 o'clock. Christine paused, just for a half second, the smallest fracture in her composure. By how long? Victoria finally opened the envelope, and she looked at the first page, and something in her expression, just a flicker, just the edge of something, went wrong. As long as it takes, she said. In the chair by the wall, Lily Cole watched the adults in the room and didn't say anything. She'd learned from her father that sometimes the most important thing you could do was to stay quiet and let the room tell you what it needed to. The envelope was open. The woman in the nice suit was reading. Lily looked at the waterfall photograph on the office wall and thought about wishes. Daniel Rest arrived in Victoria's office 6 minutes after Christine went to find him, which meant he'd been close by, possibly already on his way to the boardroom to prep the signing documents. He was Sterling Harbor's head of legal, 53 years old, with the careful skepticism of a man who had spent 3 decades being paid to assume the worst about people's intentions. He walked in, took one look at Ethan, one look at the open envelope on Victoria's desk, and his expression settled into the particular blankness of a lawyer who had just realized the morning was not going to go the way he'd planned. Victoria. He said her name like a question. Sit down, Daniel. She was still standing. She hadn't sat since Ethan had come in, and he noticed that, the way she held herself upright when she was processing something difficult, as though sitting down might make her more vulnerable to it. Daniel sat. He looked at Ethan. And you are? Ethan Cole. The name didn't land on Daniel the way it had landed on Victoria. He looked at Ethan with the assessing flatness of someone running a quick internal search and coming up with nothing. Should I know that name? The Cole Family Trust, Ethan said. Your compliance office has received 4 certified letters from the trust's legal representative over the past 18 months. The most recent was 6 weeks ago. Something moved across Daniel's face. Not recognition exactly, but the shadow of it. The way a man looks when he realizes he's heard a piece of information before and filed it somewhere he can no longer find. He glanced at Victoria. I don't have immediate recall of... Page 11, Victoria said. She was looking at one of the documents from the envelope, holding it with both hands. Look at page 11. Daniel reached across the desk and took the document she extended toward him. He found page 11. He read it. He read it again. Then he put the document down on his knee, very carefully, and looked at Ethan with an entirely different quality of attention. Where did you get this? My wife compiled it, Ethan said, over approximately 4 months before she died. She was a financial compliance analyst, private sector mostly, but she had contacts inside several regulatory bodies. What she found, she documented. What she documented is in that envelope. Your wife is deceased? 3 years ago, yes. Daniel looked at the document again. Then he looked at Victoria. Some kind of wordless communication passed between them. The compressed shorthand of 2 people who had worked together long enough to hold entire conversations and glances. We need to pull the Meridian Bridge filings, Daniel said. I know. And we need Marcus in this room. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not yet. Victoria, not yet, Daniel. Her voice didn't rise. It went in the other direction, quieter, more deliberate, the way a person speaks when they're working very hard to stay in control of something. I want to know what we're looking at before I bring Marcus into anything. Pull the filings, get me the original acquisition due diligence report, Get me everything Meridian Bridge submitted to us in the last 14 months. She set down the documents she was holding and looked at Ethan. And I want to know exactly who this man is and why he walked in here instead of going to a regulatory body. I did go to regulatory bodies, Ethan said. He said it without defensiveness, just as a statement of fact. 2 of them. The first one opened an inquiry and closed it 4 months later without explanation. The second one referred the complaint back to the company's internal compliance office. Which is where the letters went, Daniel said slowly. Which is where the letters went, Ethan confirmed. The room was quiet for a moment. From somewhere down the hall came the muffled sound of voices, the ordinary noise of a building going about its morning. And then it faded, and there was just the hum of the air system and the sound of Lily shifting in her chair. Victoria glanced at her. The girl had been extraordinarily still for the past 15 minutes, sitting with her hands in her lap and watching everything with those serious eyes. It was disconcerting, not in a bad way, but in the way that children are sometimes disconcerting when they're paying more attention than you expect them to. Is there somewhere she can wait? Victoria said to Ethan. Somewhere more comfortable? Christine can... She stays with me, Ethan said. It wasn't aggressive. It was simply the statement of someone who had made that decision long ago and wasn't revisiting it. Victoria looked at him for a moment, then nodded once. Okay. She turned back to Daniel. Get me those filings. Daniel left. Victoria stood at her window again, her back to the room. Ethan stayed where he was, standing, because he hadn't been invited to sit and he wasn't going to assume. He held the patience in his body the way he'd learned to hold it. Not comfortable, not restless, just present. How long have you been trying to get this in front of someone? Victoria said. She was still looking out the window. 18 months of formal attempts, he said. About a year of watching from the outside before that. 2.5 years. Yes. She turned to look at him. Why didn't you just go public? Take it to a journalist. That's what most people would do. Because most of what's in that envelope would be dismissed as circumstantial without the right context, he said. And because going public before anyone with actual authority has seen it gives the people involved time to construct a counter-narrative. I've watched that happen. It doesn't end well for the person who went public. So you came here. So I came here. She held his gaze for a moment. He met it without difficulty. Not as a challenge, just steadily. And he could see her trying to figure out what category to put him in, which slot in her mental framework he was supposed to occupy. He didn't fit neatly anywhere, and he could tell that bothered her in a specific way. Not hostility, but the unease of a person who is very good at reading situations, suddenly finding that their instruments aren't giving clean readings. I owe you an apology, she said, for downstairs, for making you wait. You didn't know who I was. That's not actually an excuse, she said, and surprised him. He didn't respond to that. There wasn't anything useful to say to it. Victoria looked at her watch, then at the door, then at the ceiling in the way people do when they're running calculations they'd rather not be running. The board is expecting to sign in, she checked again. 40 minutes. I know. Marcus is expecting to sign in 40 minutes. I know that too. She turned and faced him fully. Tell me the short version, not the documents. I'll read the documents. Tell me what you understand to be happening. Ethan took a breath. He'd rehearsed this part, not in the sense of scripting it, but in the way you rehearse something when you've been carrying it for so long that you need to know you can say it clearly when the moment finally arrives. The Hargrove Group's medical technology division is worth, by conservative independent estimates, somewhere between $600 and $700 million, he said. The deal your CFO structured values it at $400 million. The difference, $200 million at minimum, flows through a series of holding structures to Meridian Bridge Holdings, which is the parent company selling you the asset. And Meridian Bridge has a financial relationship with a private investment vehicle that your CFO has a personal stake in. Victoria was very still. So he's buying a company from people he has a financial interest in seeing paid less than market value, she said, and taking a quiet piece of the difference. She stopped. That's not just a conflict of interest, that's fraud. That's fraud, Ethan agreed. She turned away from him and pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead, and for just a second, one unguarded second, She looked exactly as young as she was. Then she pulled herself back together and turned around, and the CEO was present again in the set of her shoulders. How solid is the documentation? Solid enough that I wouldn't have walked in here if it wasn't. That's not an answer. It's a very good answer, he said. If I were wrong, I would be exposing myself to significant legal liability by making these accusations to you directly. I wouldn't do that unless I was certain. She looked at him, and something in her expression shifted slightly, not toward trust exactly, but toward the recognition that he'd made a coherent point. Daniel will verify, she said. Yes. And if he verifies, then you have a decision to make about the next 40 minutes, Ethan said, and I'll be honest with you. That decision is yours, not mine. I came here to give you the information. What you do with it is your business. She looked at him like that surprised her. He wasn't sure what she'd been expecting. That he'd have demands, maybe, or some kind of leverage play. Most people who showed up with information like this were looking for something. He understood why she'd assumed that. He didn't take it personally. What do you want out of this? She said. There has to be something. There's a pediatric medical program, he said. Part of the Hargrove Division's portfolio. It operates in 6 cities, serves about 4,000 kids annually, and runs at a small loss that gets offset by the division's profitable units. If this acquisition goes through at the price Marcus negotiated, the new structure will require asset optimization. That program will be cut within 18 months. She stared at him. That's what you want, she said slowly. You want the program protected. It's not for me personally, he said. But yes, whatever else happens, whatever you decide to do with the people who structured this deal, the program should be protected. It didn't do anything wrong. The room was quiet. From the chair by the wall, Lily said, without looking up from the small drawing she'd been making on the back of a receipt she'd pulled from her pocket. 4,000 is a lot of kids. Neither Ethan nor Victoria said anything for a moment. Then Victoria said very quietly, Yeah, it is. Daniel came back 22 minutes later with a banker's box of files and an expression that had aged approximately 5 years in his absence. He set the box on Victoria's desk and stood there looking at it like it might do something. Okay, he said. Tell me, Victoria said. I need to preface this by saying I have not had time to do a complete review, and anything I say right now should be understood as preliminary. Daniel, he sighed. He was a man who had spent his career being careful, and careful men don't like being pushed to speak before they're certain. But he looked at the box and then at Victoria, and then said, The Meridian Bridge connection is real. It's in the original due diligence report, buried in an appendix described as an immaterial historical relationship that had been resolved prior to the commencement of negotiations. I reviewed it 14 months ago and flagged it to Marcus directly. He told me it had been independently reviewed and cleared. Had it been? Victoria said. A pause. The clearance document in the file references an external review firm. I've never heard of that firm, and I can't find any registration for it. The silence that followed was the kind that carries weight. What else? Victoria said. The valuation, Daniel said. He opened the box and pulled out a document that had been tabbed in 3 places, apparently during his walk back to the office. The $400 million valuation was done by a firm called Carver Analytics. Carver Analytics was incorporated 11 months ago. Before this engagement, their only clients were 2 small commercial real estate transactions totaling about $8 million. Victoria's hand was on the edge of her desk, and he could see her grip tighten slightly. Just the knuckles. Just for a second. An 11-month-old analytics firm valued a $700 million acquisition, she said. At $400 million, Daniel said. Yes. And nobody... She stopped. She pushed away from the desk and moved to the window again. He'd noticed she did that when she needed to think, needed the physical separation from the thing in front of her. Nobody in this building questioned that? I didn't know the firm's age, Daniel said. It was represented to me as an established independent valuator with relevant sector experience. I didn't run background on them. I should have. He stopped. That's on me. The admission cost him something. Ethan watched Daniel make it and felt, against his better judgment, a flicker of respect for the man. It was easy to admit fault when there was no cost. It was harder to do it when there was. "How much of the board knows the real valuation range?" Ethan said. Both of them looked at him. He'd been quiet so long they'd almost stopped accounting for his presence in the room. Daniel looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at the box. "The board received the Carver Analytics report," Daniel said carefully. "Not an independent assessment." "Not an independent assessment?" Ethan nodded. He'd expected that. If the board had been given a clean look at true valuation, someone would have asked a question. Somebody always asked a question. "The 11 o'clock," Victoria said. She turned back from the window. Her face was composed now in a way that was very deliberate. Whatever she was feeling underneath it, she had made a decision to not be visibly feeling it. "Who's in that room right now?" "The Hargrove representatives arrived at 9:30, Daniel said. "Marcus is with them. 3 board members are already in the building. The remaining 2 are on their way. And Marcus doesn't know you're aware of any of this. As far as he's concerned, the hold on the meeting was a scheduling issue." Victoria looked at Ethan. Something passed across her face that he couldn't quite read. Not quite gratitude, not quite anger, somewhere between the two. The expression of a person who is having to reckon with how close they came to something they can't fully see yet. "I have to go down there," she said. "Victoria," Daniel started. "I have to go down there, Daniel, because if I disappear from that room for another 30 minutes, Marcus will know something is wrong. I need him not to know yet." She was already moving toward her blazer, the one draped over the chair back that she'd apparently been too tired this morning to hang up properly. She pulled it on and straightened it and became, in the space of about 4 seconds, somebody different. Or not different, but more fully assembled. "I need you to stay in this office. I need you to get me 3 things. Independent confirmation of the valuation gap from someone you trust outside this company, a complete ownership chart for Meridian Bridge Holdings, and the personal financial disclosure Marcus filed when he was hired." She paused. "Does HR still have that?" "They should." "Get it." She looked at Ethan. "You stay here. Don't leave." "I wasn't planning to," he said. She was already at the door, then she stopped, hand on the frame, and looked back at him. "The letters you sent. The certified letters to the compliance office." "Yes. They should have reached me." He held her gaze. "I know." She stood there for just a moment longer, absorbing that, or maybe just letting herself feel the full weight of it before she had to go put on the performance of a CEO whose morning was going exactly as planned. Then she went. But Daniel worked at Victoria's desk with the careful intensity of a man who had decided that the next 90 minutes were the most professionally important of his career. He'd called in 2 of his junior attorneys and dispatched them on separate tasks. And now he was moving through the files in the banker's box with the systematic focus of someone who has stopped feeling surprised by what they're finding and started simply cataloging it. Ethan sat in the chair across from the desk. Lily had migrated from her spot by the wall and was now sitting on the floor next to him, using the seat of his chair as a table surface for the small drawings she'd been making. She'd produced a short pencil from somewhere in her jacket pocket. She always had one. He'd stopped being surprised by it. And she was drawing with the calm efficiency of a child fully absorbed in her own interior world. "What are you drawing?" he said quietly, so as not to disturb Daniel's concentration. "The fountain downstairs," she said. "Except in mine, you can make wishes." He looked at the paper. She'd drawn the waterfall with the kind of confident, strange perspective that children have before they learn what things are supposed to look like. The water going in several directions at once, a small stick figure standing at the edge of it with what appeared to be a coin extended in one hand. "Who's that?" he asked. "Me," she said. "I'm wishing for a dog." "We've talked about the dog." "I know. I'm just wishing. Wishing is free." He let that sit. Outside the office windows, the city was in full mid-morning motion. The particular energy of a Tuesday that doesn't know it's sitting at the edge of something significant. The ordinary texture of a day that someone else will later describe as the day everything changed. He thought about Margaret. He did that more than he let himself admit. Thought about her in flashes, in the margins of things, in moments when there wasn't anything demanding his full attention. She'd been meticulous, his wife. careful and thorough, in a way that had sometimes frustrated him when they were younger, when he was still running on the particular arrogance of a man who believes that moving fast is the same as moving well. She'd been the one who slowed him down. She'd been the one who taught him that patience wasn't passivity, that waiting for the right moment wasn't the same as doing nothing. She'd been working on the Meridian Bridge material for 4 months before she got the diagnosis. He hadn't known what she was working on exactly. She kept her professional life compartmentalized, not out of secrecy, but out of professional habit, and he'd been gone a lot in those years. Not deployed, but working private security contracts that kept him away for weeks at a time. He hadn't known. And then the diagnosis had arrived, and everything else had stopped mattering, and the work had gone into a box on a shelf in her study, and he hadn't opened it until 8 months after she was gone, when he was finally able to go into that room and begin the process of sorting through what she'd left behind. He'd opened the box expecting financial records, maybe client files. What he found instead was a 300-page document that his wife had assembled with the patience and precision that had characterized everything she ever did. A paper trail that pointed toward something she hadn't quite lived long enough to name out loud. He'd spent 6 months understanding it, then another 6 months figuring out what to do with it. Then 18 months trying to do it through the proper channels, watching every attempt get quietly buried, growing more certain with each failed attempt that the thing buried at the center of those documents was bigger than he'd initially understood. He had not told anyone about it. He'd talked to attorneys, the trust's attorney, a small firm in the city that had managed the Cole family trust for 2 generations and whose senior partner had known Margaret personally. But he hadn't talked to anyone in his personal life about it. He hadn't wanted to. His personal life was small by design. Lily, his sister who lived 40 minutes away, and watched Lily on the days when his work schedule made it necessary, a few men he'd served with who he talked to occasionally and met for dinner twice a year. He hadn't wanted to pull any of them into this. It wasn't their weight to carry. "Mr. Cole." He looked up. Daniel was watching him from across the desk with the focused attention of a man who had arrived at a specific question and needed a specific answer. "This trust," Daniel said. "The Cole family trust. What exactly is its relationship to Sterling Harbor?" Ethan had been waiting for this question. He'd expected it to come earlier, which meant Daniel was either more careful than he'd appeared or had been too absorbed in the file review to get to it until now. "My wife's family held a minority stake in a predecessor company that Sterling Harbor acquired about 15 years ago," he said. "As part of the acquisition terms, the Cole family trust retained a set of legacy shareholder rights, including a right of review for major transactions exceeding a certain value threshold. $350 million. Daniel stared at him. "The acquisition we're discussing is $400 million. "Yes." "And you have formal right of review authority." "My attorney does," Ethan said. "Formally. The trust's legal representative has the right to request a 30-day review period before any qualifying transaction is finalized. That right was never exercised because the trust's previous trustees didn't. They weren't aware of the full scope of those legacy rights. My wife discovered them about 2 years before she got sick. She was going to have the trust's governance documents updated to reflect them properly." He paused. "She didn't get the chance." "So nobody here knew," Daniel said slowly. "Nobody in this building knew the trust existed in that capacity." "Not until this morning." Daniel sat back in his chair. He rubbed his face with both hands in the way that exhausted, intelligent men do when they're trying to reassemble their understanding of a situation. "You walked in here this morning," he said, "with a legal right to stop this transaction, and Marcus's people let you sit in the lobby and then tried to have you removed." "They didn't know," Ethan said. "Marcus's people didn't know who I was either. Nobody did. That's the point. But if you just told them, if I told them at the door who I was and what I was carrying, the information inside that envelope would have been in Marcus Hale's hands within 10 minutes, Ethan said. And whatever moves he was able to make in the time between that moment and the signing, I couldn't predict what those would look like, but I know they wouldn't have been in Victoria Sterling's interest." He held Daniel's gaze. "I needed to be in this room first." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Lily on the floor, still drawing her wishing fountain, and then back at Ethan. "You planned all of this," Daniel said. It wasn't an accusation. It was more like the statement of a man encountering something he hadn't accounted for. I planned the parts I could, Ethan said. The rest I improvised. You brought your daughter. My sister was unavailable, and Lily's... He stopped. He looked at the small head bent over the drawing, the pencil moving in steady, certain strokes. She's been with me through most of this. It felt wrong to leave her out of the end of it. Daniel opened his mouth, seemed to think better of whatever he was about to say, and closed it again. He picked up his phone instead and placed the call he'd been building toward for the last few minutes. The call to whoever outside this building he trusted enough to give him an independent assessment of a billion-dollar valuation in under an hour. Ethan leaned back in his chair and waited. Lily held up the drawing for him to see. The fountain looked the same. She'd added something to it, a small figure standing a little distance away from the wishing figure, watching. "Who's that one?" Ethan asked. She studied the drawing with the critical eye of the artist. "That's a lady," she said. "She's watching to see if it works." "Does it?" Lily looked at the paper for another moment. Then she turned it over and started a new drawing on the back. "Not yet," she said. Victoria came back 47 minutes after she left. She walked in and closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment with her hand still on the handle. And in those few seconds, before she turned around, before she put the composure back in place, Ethan could see exactly what the last 47 minutes had cost her. She turned around. Her face was steady. Her voice was steady. "He knows something is wrong," she said. "I could see it. He's been watching me since I walked into that room. Not obviously, but I could feel it. He's been managing me this whole time." Something moved through her expression. Not anger exactly, more like the particular recognition of someone who has just understood, with full clarity, how they've been played. "For 14 months he's been managing me. And I never..." She stopped. "You trusted him," Ethan said. "That's not the same as being foolish." She looked at him sharply, as though she'd expected him to stay quiet, as though the comment surprised her coming from him. "Daniel," she said, "what do we have?" "Enough," Daniel said. He said it the way lawyers say things when they mean significantly more than enough, but I want to be precise. The valuation gap is real. The Meridian Bridge ownership chain runs through 3 holding entities to a private fund that lists Marcus Hale as a limited partner. The external review firm is non-existent. I had someone check the registration in 3 separate states. And the compliance letters... He paused. The compliance letters were received by this office. They were logged, and then they were routed to a subfolder in the compliance systems archive that is only accessible to 2 people, the chief compliance officer and the CFO. The room was very quiet. "Marcus controls compliance reporting," Victoria said. "He restructured the department 18 months ago," Daniel said. "I signed off on it. I didn't..." He stopped himself. "I didn't see what it was." Victoria nodded once, slowly, in the way of someone absorbing a series of blows and choosing not to fall down. Then she looked at Ethan. "The right of review," she said. "Daniel explained it to me while I was downstairs. If your attorney files formally..." "It stops the transaction for 30 days, Ethan said. "Mandatory. It can't be overridden at the company level." "Can Marcus block it?" "Not if it's filed directly with the board," Ethan said, "which is how my attorney will file it." He looked at her steadily. "But you should know. If the right of review is invoked, the Hargrove representatives will pull out of the deal. They'll know something's wrong. Whatever chance there is of pursuing this acquisition on better terms after an investigation, it probably disappears." She looked at him for a long time. He let her. "The healthcare division," she said finally. "The pediatric program. If the deal falls apart entirely..." "It stays with Hargrove," he said, "which is not ideal, but it keeps running. The cut happens when the asset is absorbed into a structure that's been engineered to minimize it. As long as it stays where it stays intact." Victoria put her hand on the edge of the desk and stood there with the particular stillness of someone making a decision that has no good options, only less bad ones. Outside, somewhere down the hall, Ethan could hear the sound of people moving, of a building that didn't yet know it was 20 minutes from a crisis. "Call your attorney," Victoria said. He was already reaching for his phone. The call took 4 minutes. Ethan spoke to his attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had managed the Cole Family Trust's legal affairs for 11 years, and who, when Ethan told her where he was and what he needed, said, "Only give me the room number," before hanging up. She didn't ask if he was certain. She'd been asking him that question for 18 months, and at some point in the past year, she'd apparently decided she already had her answer. He put the phone back in his pocket and looked at Victoria. "She'll be here in 20 minutes. The filing goes directly to your board chair." "Raymond Holt," Victoria said, more to herself than to him. She was thinking out loud, running the sequence forward in her mind. He could see it, the way she looked when she was processing contingencies, the slight tension at the corners of her eyes. He'll want to know where this came from. He'll want to know everything. "That's fine," Ethan said. "Everything is in the envelope." "Raymond is going to be—" She stopped. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth briefly, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as the thing she did when she was editing herself, choosing a version of the truth that was functional rather than complete. "He's going to be difficult about this. He's been on Sterling Harbor's board for 18 years, and he does not like surprises. Most people don't. Raymond especially. He and Marcus play golf." She said the last sentence in the flat tone of someone who has just finished connecting 2 things she wishes weren't connected. Daniel, who had been quiet through the phone call, looked up from the document he was reviewing. "That doesn't have to mean anything." "I know," Victoria said. Victoria down. "I'm just—" She moved away from the desk to the other side of the room, stood at the credenza and poured herself a glass of water from the carafe there and drank about half of it in one go. Not elegantly, just drank it, the way a person drinks something when their body is asking for it. "I'm thinking about how this conversation is going to go." "Carefully," Daniel said. "Yes." "Very." She set the glass down and turned around. "What's Marcus doing right now?" "Waiting," Daniel said. "He sent Christine a message 20 minutes ago asking when the meeting was resuming. I had her tell him there was a minor documentation issue being resolved." "He bought that?" "He responded with a thumbs-up emoji," Daniel said. His voice was completely neutral. Something crossed Victoria's face, a flash of something that might have been darkly funny under different circumstances, or might have just been rage wearing an unfamiliar expression. She turned to Ethan. "Can I ask you something personal?" He wasn't expecting that. "Go ahead." "Your wife found this," she said. "She spent months on it, and it cost her, the last months of her life when she was—" She stopped, recalibrated. Why was she looking into Meridian Bridge in the first place? What was her connection to any of this? He'd been asked versions of this question before by his attorney, by one of the regulatory investigators who'd briefly taken an interest. He'd answered it the same way each time, factually, and without editorializing, because the full answer was the kind of thing that only made sense if you already knew Margaret, and she was not someone you could explain to a stranger in a few sentences. "She had a client," he said, "a small healthcare consulting firm that had done business with a Meridian Bridge subsidiary. The client noticed irregularities in the contract terms, so nothing actionable, but something that didn't add up. They hired Margaret to review the financial structure and tell them what they were looking at." He paused. "She found the irregularities, and then she kept looking. That's what she did. That's—" He stopped for a half second, just one. That was how she was. She didn't stop when she'd answered the question she'd been paid to answer. She stopped when she'd answered the question she was actually asking. Victoria looked at him for a moment. What was she actually asking? "She wanted to know where the money was going," he said. "Not the money in the contract, all of it. She wanted to understand the whole structure. And the more she understood it, the clearer it became that it wasn't just her client's contract that was problematic. The whole thing was built on—" He searched for the word. "On the assumption that nobody would look hard enough." "And nobody had," Victoria said. "And nobody had," he said. "Until Margaret." The room held that for a moment. Outside, the city continued its ordinary Tuesday motion, indifferent and constant. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. She said it without ceremony, just as a plain fact. "About your wife." "Thank you," Ethan said. He accepted it the same way, plainly, without deflection or the usual ritual minimization. He'd learned, eventually, that the only honest response to condolence was to just receive it. Lily had gone very quiet on the floor beside his chair. When he looked down at her, she was sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, not drawing, just listening in the particular way she listened when something in the room mattered more than she'd initially expected. He rested his hand briefly on the top of her head. She leaned into it, just slightly. Marcus Hale came to them. It happened at the 11:40 mark, when the silence from the boardroom had apparently stretched long enough to override whatever instinct was telling him to wait. Ethan heard him before he appeared, the sound of footsteps in the hall with the distinctive rhythm of a man who is pretending to be calm and isn't quite managing it, that slightly too fast pace that people produce when they're trying not to look like they're hurrying. The office door opened without a knock. Marcus Hale was 51 years old, built with the compact, well-maintained physicality of a man who played racquetball twice a week and took his diet seriously. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Ethan's car. His hair was gray at the temples in a way that had probably been cultivated rather than allowed. He walked into the room with the expression of a senior executive who has not yet decided whether to be concerned or annoyed, and then his eyes found Ethan, and Ethan watched the calculation happen in real time. The quick assessment, the categorization, the same process the receptionist downstairs had run, arriving at the same conclusion. Not a threat. Not anyone who mattered. "Victoria," Marcus said, barely glancing at Daniel. "What is going on? We have representatives downstairs who have been waiting for almost 2 hours. The Hargrove team they're getting restless. David Chen has another flight at 3 o'clock. "I know," Victoria said. Her voice was absolutely even. "We need a few more minutes." "A few more?" Marcus stopped. He looked at Daniel, then at Ethan, then back at Victoria, and Ethan saw the moment it shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible, the way a light changes when a cloud moves over it. Something behind Marcus's eyes made a very small adjustment. "Who is this?" "His name is Ethan Cole," Victoria said. Nothing on Marcus's face. He was good. He was very good. The particular kind of good that comes from years of practice, from building a face that doesn't give things away, from learning to manage the space between what you know and what you show. "Should I know that name?" "Ethan Cole," Daniel said from behind his stack of files. "Cole Family Trust. Legacy shareholder rights from the Brennan Sterling acquisition, 2009. Right of review for qualifying transactions." He said it with the specific, deliberate pace of a man who is selecting each word for impact. "Mr. Cole's attorney is on her way to file with the board chair." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Ethan counted them. Then Marcus said, "I see," in a voice so controlled it was almost a parody of calm, and Ethan felt every trained instinct in his body sharpened to attention. Not alarm exactly, but the particular heightening of awareness that comes when you recognize that the situation has just changed. "Marcus," Victoria said, "I need you to—" "Where did this come from?" Marcus said. He wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was looking at Ethan with the direct, unblinking attention of a man who has dropped the performance and gone somewhere more fundamental. "The trust, the filing, where did this originate?" "I'm not sure that's a relevant question right now," Ethan said. "I think it's very relevant." Marcus's voice was still controlled, but the civility in it had a harder edge now, a structural quality like something load-bearing. "A man walks into this building on the morning of a major acquisition with a sealed legal filing, a filing that somehow involves rights that haven't been exercised in 15 years, and I'm supposed to just accept that as a coincidence in timing." "No," Ethan said. "You're not supposed to accept it as a coincidence. It isn't one." "Marcus," Victoria's voice cut through the room with the specific sharpness of someone who has decided that the careful approach has run its course. "I've reviewed the documentation Mr. Cole brought. Daniel has verified the core elements of it independently. I need you to answer a question directly. What is your financial relationship with Meridian Bridge Holdings?" The room went entirely still. Marcus looked at her. His face did something complicated. Not quite a crack, but a fracture line, the kind you can see only if you're watching closely. "That's a question that requires context. Yes or no," Victoria said. "Do you have a financial interest in Meridian Bridge Holdings or any affiliated entity?" A pause. One beat too long. "I have a small passive investment in a private fund that has broad portfolio exposure," that Marcus said. It would require a detailed audit to determine whether any portion of that portfolio overlaps with Marcus. She said his name like a period at the end of a sentence. Don't. He looked at her, and in that look, in the specific quality of what passed between them in those 2 seconds, Ethan saw something that surprised him. Not the calculation of a man caught, but something older and more complicated. The expression of a person who has been running a long race and has just looked down and realized the ground has gone. You should have your personal attorney present before you say anything else, Daniel said quietly. That's not a threat. That's me giving you accurate information, Marcus. As someone who has worked alongside you for 6 years. Marcus looked at Daniel. The expression on his face in that moment was one of the stranger things Ethan had witnessed. A kind of bare, unprocessed surprise, as though the statement had landed somewhere beneath all his defenses, in the part of him that still operated on the assumption that professional relationships were what they appeared to be. I see, Marcus said again, and then he walked out of the office. The next few minutes had the disjointed quality of things happening faster than anyone had quite planned for. Daniel called the board chair, Raymond Holt, immediately after Marcus left the room. The call was brief, and from what Ethan could hear on one side of it, did not go smoothly. There was audible pushback, the sound of a man who did not want to be receiving the information he was receiving and was expressing that through increasingly pointed questions about procedure and timing. Daniel answered each one with the patient, precise diction of a lawyer who has done his preparation and knows it, and eventually the call ended and Daniel set the phone down and said, "He's on his way up." Victoria had moved to her desk and was writing something, but Ethan couldn't see what, but she was writing quickly, the pen moving in rapid, compressed strokes. She didn't look up. How long? He was already in the building, Daniel said. 5 minutes. She nodded and kept writing. Ethan looked at Lily. You doing okay? I'm hungry, she said. She said it quietly, not as a complaint, just as a piece of information she was conveying because it was accurate. He looked at his watch. It was nearly noon. She'd had a granola bar in the car on the way here, and that was all. I know, I'm sorry. We'll eat soon. It's okay. She was quiet for a moment. Is the man in the gray suit in trouble? He considered how to answer that. Probably. Did he do something bad? Yeah, he did. She thought about this with the same philosophical gravity she applied to most things. Was he bad before he did the bad thing, or did he just do the bad thing? Ethan looked at her. It was the kind of question that didn't really have an answer, or had too many. I don't know, he said. Probably some of both. Lily accepted this and went back to her drawing. She'd started a new one. From what he could see, it appeared to be the waterfall again, but larger this time, taking up the whole page. Victoria looked up from her writing. She'd been listening, he realized. Her expression had something in it that wasn't quite a look he'd seen from her before. Softer or less defended, something that the morning had been slowly wearing away at without her permission. She looked back down at her paper and kept writing. Set. Raymond Holt arrived at 12:04 with the energy of a man who had been building up a head of steam in the elevator and was managing it poorly. He was 67 years old and built like a man who had once been significantly larger and had lost the weight without losing the frame, and he walked into Victoria's office with the proprietary authority of someone who has been on a board long enough to half believe he owns the place. He stopped when he saw Ethan. Who is this? He said, directly to Victoria, not to Ethan. This is Ethan Cole, Victoria said. He's the reason we're having this conversation. Raymond looked at Ethan in the way powerful men sometimes look at people they have decided are beneath notice, a brief, comprehensive dismissal. Then he looked at Daniel, apparently finding him more worth addressing. Daniel, what exactly is going on here? I just got off a call with Marcus. You spoke to Marcus? Victoria said sharply. He called me on my way up. He said there's been some kind of interference with the transaction, that someone has filed or is attempting to file a legal instrument of questionable provenance. Raymond turned back to Victoria. Is that accurate? The provenance is not questionable, Daniel said. I've reviewed the trust documents personally. The right of review authority is legitimate, properly documented, and was established as part of the original acquisition agreement in 2009. I can provide you the relevant sections. That's not the issue. Raymond, Victoria's voice, clean and quiet and final. Marcus has a financial interest in the company we are 40 minutes from acquiring at $200 million below market value. The external review that cleared his conflict of interest was conducted by a firm that does not legally exist. The compliance letters flagging this were buried in a subfolder that Marcus controls. She paused. One beat. We need to stop the transaction. The room was silent. Raymond Holt stood in the center of it, and his face went through several phases. Disbelief, resistance, the particular anger of a man whose mourning has been restructured without his consent. And then, slowly, something more serious. The settling of a man who has been on enough boards long enough to know what the specific combination of words he just heard actually means. He sat down in the chair across from Victoria's desk. He hadn't been invited to sit. He sat anyway, and nobody said anything about it. Show me, he said. Daniel began with page 11. Okay. Patricia Osei arrived at 12:22. She was in her early 50s, with the compact, self-contained presence of a person who has learned that most situations are best approached from a position of observable calm. She carried a slim briefcase and wore reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she greeted Ethan with a nod that was professional and brief. The greeting of two people who have had a long working relationship that has not required the addition of warmth to function effectively. She looked at Lily. Hello. Hi, Lily said. Are you the attorney? I am. My dad said you would fix it. Patricia looked at Ethan. Did he? More or less, he said. She set her briefcase on the corner of the desk and opened it. Where are we? Daniel began to lay it out for her, efficiently, in the compressed shorthand of one legal professional briefing another. Ethan listened with one part of his attention while the rest of him stayed present in the room, watching the door, watching Raymond Holt, who was reading through the documents Daniel had assembled with the focused silence of a man who has understood that something is required of him and is trying to determine exactly what. Patricia asked 3 clarifying questions. She received answers. She closed her briefcase. The filing is ready, she said to Ethan. Your authorization to proceed? Proceed, he said. She looked at Raymond Holt. Mr. Holt, as board chair of Sterling Harbor, you are the required recipient of this filing. I'm going to need your acknowledgement of receipt. Raymond looked at her over the top of the documents. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the documents again. Then he put them down on the desk and straightened in his chair. Proceed, he said. He had the voice of a man who has made difficult calls before and knows the sound of his own authority, even when using it feels like standing in front of something moving fast. What happened next was not cinematic. It was not orderly. It had none of the clean, decisive quality of the way these moments are described afterward, when people have had time to compress them into a narrative that makes sense. What actually happened was that Raymond Holt went downstairs to the boardroom with Daniel to inform the Hargrove representatives that the transaction was being suspended pending a mandatory review. And while he was doing that, the Hargrove team's lead counsel, a sharp-faced woman named Brenda Park, who had clearly anticipated that something was wrong the moment the meeting was delayed, asked 3 questions that Raymond did not handle well, and the conversation rapidly deteriorated from suspension of proceedings into what was, in practical terms, a collapse. David Chen, the Hargrove Group's principal, said very little. He listened to Raymond stumble through the explanation, watched Brenda Park take apart the procedural justifications with surgical efficiency, and then stood up and said, quietly and with complete finality, "We'll be in touch through counsel," and led his team out of the room. The Hargrove acquisition, 14 months in the making, was over before 1 o'clock. Ethan knew this because Victoria came back from downstairs and told him. She came in and sat on the edge of her desk, not in her chair, on the edge of the desk itself, which struck him as significant, the kind of detail that reveals something about the true state of a person that more composed behavior conceals. She sat on the edge of her desk and looked at the far wall and said, "They're gone," and didn't say anything else for a moment. He waited. 14 months, she said. I know. That's not directed at you, she said. She stopped. I need a second to just say that out loud. 14 months. Okay. She sat with it. He let her. Outside, somewhere in the building, a phone was ringing. Unanswered, persistent. The sound of ordinary business trying to assert itself into an extraordinary morning. Marcus is still in the building, she said. Daniel is with him and our outside counsel. Raymond is on a call. He's trying to manage. She made a gesture with her hand that encompassed without specifying the scale of what was being managed. He called 2 other board members on his way back up. There's going to be an emergency board session this afternoon. That's the right move, Ethan said. I know. She looked at him. Where does the trust's right of review go from here? Procedurally. Patricia will file the formal extension notice today. That keeps the review period active for 30 days. What happens inside those 30 days depends on what your board decides to do. We're going to do an internal investigation, she said. Obviously. And we'll refer to regulatory bodies. She paused. Unless you've already done that. The prior regulatory referrals went nowhere, he said. That was before there was enough inside access to verify the documentation. With your company's cooperation and the files Daniel has already pulled, it'll land differently. She nodded. She was quiet again. Then she said, Can I ask you something else? Sure. When Marcus was in this room, when I asked him directly about Meridian Bridge, she was looking at the wall again, not at him. You were watching him. I could tell. What did you see? He thought about how to answer that accurately. I saw a man who had spent a long time being the smartest person in the room, he said slowly, who ran into a room where someone had already done the work. She looked at him. That's not quite what I asked. No, he agreed. I saw someone who had told himself a story about what he was doing, probably a story where the harm was abstract and the benefit to himself was concrete. And I saw that story fall apart in real time when the room stopped accepting it. He paused. That's not exoneration, it's what I saw. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You're more careful with people than I expected, she said. It sounded less like a compliment and more like an honest observation she hadn't intended to make out loud. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. Lily had gotten up from the floor and was standing at the office window, looking out at the city with both hands pressed flat against the glass. Dad, she said without turning around. Yeah. There's a hot dog cart down there. I see it. Can we get one after? He looked at Victoria. She was watching Lily at the window, and something in her expression had gone very quiet. Not sad exactly, but the way faces go when they're in the presence of something uncomplicated in a moment that has been entirely complicated. We can get one after, he said. The thing about a crisis, a real one, not the performed kind that executives talk about in management seminars, is that it doesn't end cleanly. It doesn't arrive at a resolution and allow everyone to exhale. It sprawls. It throws off new complications the way a fire throws off sparks. And each new spark requires attention, and the people in the center of it don't get the luxury of stopping to feel anything about it until much later, when the adrenaline has metabolized and there's nothing left to do but sit in whatever room you're in and look at what the day has made of itself. By 2 p.m, Sterling Harbor's outside counsel had arrived. By 2:30, Raymond Holt had convened an emergency board session by video link that excluded Marcus Hale. By 3, Marcus was in a conference room on 42 with 2 attorneys and the specific silence of a man who has been advised not to speak, which is its own kind of speaking. Ethan and Lily were in a small glass-walled conference room on 43 that someone had apparently decided was a reasonable place to put them. Someone, he suspected Christine, who had softened marginally over the course of the day, had brought a plate of sandwiches and a juice box, and Lily was eating with the focused attention of a child who was hungrier than she'd been letting on. And Ethan was eating a sandwich he couldn't taste because his body was running on the particular fuel of a day that had required everything from him and wasn't quite finished yet. Patricia had been in and out 3 times with updates and signatures. Each time she came back, she looked slightly more like a person who was beginning to believe that the thing they'd been working toward for 18 months was actually going to arrive. The board's accepting the review filing, she said the 3rd time. Raymond Holt is not... She looked for the word. He's not comfortable with the way this arrived, But he's a man who understands exposure, and he understands that his own position depends on being seen to respond to this correctly. He'll do the right thing for the wrong reason, which is frequently how right things get done. "What about Marcus?" Ethan said. "His attorneys are talking to Daniel's team. It's early." She looked at him over her reading glasses. "Ethan, this is going to take time. The investigation, the regulatory process. This is months, not days." "I know. And at the end of it, whatever the outcome is, it may not look like what you expected it to look like. These things rarely do." "I know that too," he said. She studied him. "You seem calmer than I would have expected." He looked at Lily, who had finished her sandwich and was now attempting to fold the wax paper into something. A boat, it looked like, though it was in the early ambiguous stages of origami where intention and result haven't yet converged. "I've been working on this for 2.5 years, he said. The part I could control was getting it in front of someone who had the standing to do something. That part is done." "And the rest?" He watched Lily's small hands fold and refold the paper with patient, inexact determination. "The rest was never mine to control," he said. "I just had to not drop it before I got it here." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Margaret would be annoyed that it took this long." He almost smiled. "Yeah." "She'd also be—" Patricia stopped. She cleared her throat. "She'd be glad you finished it." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He picked up the second half of his sandwich and took a bite, and across the small table Lily held up the wax paper boat. Lopsided, creased in the wrong places, but recognizably a boat, and looked at it with critical satisfaction. "It floats?" Ethan said. "In theory," Lily said. "Good enough," he said. She set it on the table and looked at it for another moment, then out through the glass walls of the conference room at the hallway beyond, where people were moving with the compressed, effortful energy of a company trying to hold itself together in the middle of something it hadn't seen coming. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah. We did the right thing, right?" He looked at her. She was asking seriously, not to be reassured, but to check, the way she checked everything, with the specific seriousness of a child who has learned that the world doesn't automatically confirm your assessment of yourself. "Yeah," he said. "We did." She looked at the lopsided boat on the table. "Even though it was hard?" "Especially because it was hard," he said. She thought about this. Then she picked up the boat and examined the bottom of it, looking for weaknesses. "Okay," she said, and went back to work on the hull. The hot dog cart was still there at 4:15 when Ethan finally walked Lily out of the Sterling Harbor building into the late afternoon light. She got a hot dog with mustard and ate it standing on the sidewalk with the specific, uncomplicated pleasure of a child who has been patient for a very long time and has finally arrived at the reward she was promised. Ethan stood beside her and drank a coffee from the cart. Bad coffee, the kind that tastes like it's been sitting since morning, which it probably had, and watched the building's glass facade reflect the sky above the city, that particular shade of late afternoon blue that shows up in October and nowhere else. He felt hollowed out. Not empty in a bad way, more like a space that had been occupied by something heavy for a long time and had just been relieved of it. He was aware that the feeling was temporary, that the next several months were going to require sustained attention and energy that he didn't currently feel like he possessed. But for right now, on this sidewalk, with Lily eating her hot dog and the city moving around them in its ordinary and different way, he allowed himself the specific quiet of a man who has done the thing he came to do. "Good hot dog?" he said. "Really good," Lily said, with mustard on her chin. He found a napkin in his jacket pocket and handed it to her without comment. She wiped her chin and looked up at the building. "Are we coming back?" "Probably." "Is the lady going to be nice next time?" He thought about Victoria Sterling sitting on the edge of her desk, the way she'd said 14 months like she was setting down something she'd been carrying. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." Lily finished the hot dog and handed him the wrapper and took his hand as they started walking, and that was all either of them needed from that particular moment. The investigation that followed was, as Patricia had predicted, nothing like what anyone expected it to look like. It began on a Tuesday, and continued through the following winter in a way that expanded and contracted unpredictably, throwing off new complications just when the people managing it thought they'd arrived at solid ground. Sterling Harbor's outside counsel coordinated with two regulatory bodies simultaneously. A forensic accounting firm spent 6 weeks going through 14 months of acquisition documentation and came out the other side with a report that was, in Daniel Rest's measured assessment, significantly worse than I had originally estimated. The valuation gap turned out to be not $200 million, but closer to $240, once the forensic accountants untangled the layered holding structures that Meridian Bridge had used to obscure the asset's true revenue profile. The private fund in which Marcus Hale held his stake, the one with the broad portfolio exposure he'd described with such technical precision in Victoria's office, turned out to have been structured specifically to benefit from the transaction, in a way that would have generated a return for Marcus personally in the range of $12 to $14 million upon closing. It was not, in the end, a story about a man who had made a bad decision under pressure. It was a story about a man who had made a series of deliberate, carefully constructed decisions over the course of more than a year, with the particular patience of someone who believed he was smarter than everyone around him and had enough structural authority to ensure he stayed that way. Marcus Hale resigned from Sterling Harbor 3 weeks after the emergency board session. He didn't go quietly. There was a period of approximately 10 days during which his personal attorney sent a sequence of letters to Sterling Harbor's counsel that ranged in tone from aggrieved to threatening. But eventually the weight of the forensic accounting report, combined with the regulatory referral and the fact that two of his former colleagues at previous firms had been contacted as part of the investigation's scope expansion, persuaded him that quiet was the more practical option. He was gone by November. Ethan learned this from Patricia, who called him on a Wednesday morning while he was making Lily's lunch and told him with the compressed satisfaction of someone delivering information they have been waiting to deliver for a long time. He stood at the kitchen counter with the phone against his ear and listened, and when she finished, he said, "Thank you." And she said, "Don't thank me yet. The regulatory process is still in early stages and there's no guarantee of what it produces." And he said, "I know. Thank you anyway." And she made a small sound that might have been the closest she got to laughing, and they ended the call. He finished making the sandwich. He put it in the bag. He zipped the bag. He stood at the counter for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen, the particular quiet of a house with a child in it who is currently at school, that specific textured silence, and thought about Margaret. Not with grief, exactly. With something more complicated, the kind of feeling that doesn't have a clean name, that lives in the space between grief and gratitude, and the strange, unearned lightness of a thing finally finished. He thought about her sitting at the desk in her study, working through those documents with that meticulous patience she had. He thought about the box on the shelf. He thought about 3 years of carrying something that wasn't originally his to carry, and the specific weight of doing a thing not because you want to, but because it's the right continuation of something that someone you loved started. He didn't think about it for long. He had things to do. Victoria Sterling called him for the first time on a Thursday, 5 weeks after the morning in her office. He almost didn't pick up. The number wasn't in his phone, and he'd been getting calls from journalists, 2 of whom had apparently gotten a fragment of the story from somewhere inside Sterling Harbor's building and were pursuing it with the particular tenacity of people who know they're close to something. He'd been letting those go to voicemail, but something made him pick up this one, some instinct he didn't examine too closely, and he said, "Cole?" And there was a brief pause on the other end, and then she said, "This is Victoria Sterling. I hope this is a reasonable time to call." He was in the parking lot of Lily's school, 10 minutes early for pickup. "It's fine," he said. "How are you?" A pause. He got the impression she hadn't expected that question. "I've been better," she said. "I've also been worse. It's been an interesting few weeks. I've heard some of it through my attorney." "Some of it is still internal," she said. "Some of it I'm not. I'm not ready to talk about in detail. But I wanted to call because—" She stopped. He heard something on her end that might have been a window, air, the ambient sound of a city. "I wanted to call because I owe you more than what I said in that conference room on your way out. which was essentially nothing. You were having a difficult afternoon. So were you, she said. And you were considerably more composed about it. I'd had longer to prepare. That's generous. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about the letters, the ones you sent to the compliance office. You don't have to. I want to, she said, and the directness of it, the clean absence of hedging, stopped him. I've been running this company for 2 years, and in those 2 years, I've been so focused on not making the mistakes that there's a version of what happened that I could tell where I'm mostly a victim of someone else's deception. And there's a version where I trusted too fast and checked too little because I was too busy trying to prove I could do this job to actually do the job properly. A pause. Both of those are true. I'm trying to figure out how to hold both of those at the same time. He looked out the windshield at the school entrance, the trickle of parents beginning to gather. That's harder than just picking one, he said. Yes, it is. But it's more accurate. Yes, she said. It is. They were quiet for a moment, not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that exists between people who have arrived at an honest thing and are allowing it to be what it is without filling it with noise. I wanted to ask you about the pediatric program, she said. The Hargrove Division program. Do you know what's happening with it? I know the Hargrove deal is dead, he said. The program stays with them. That's the current situation, she said. But Hargrove's financial position without the Sterling Harbor acquisition is they have some structural challenges. The program operates at a loss, and without the offset from the profitable units that would have come with a larger transaction, there are real questions about how long they can sustain it. A pause. I've been talking to David Chen. He sat up slightly. David Chen pulled out of this deal. He pulled out of the deal as structured, she said. He did not pull out of the idea of a deal. And what he said when I called him last week was, she stopped, and he heard her choosing her words. He said that what happened was not entirely a surprise to him, that his team had concerns about the valuation methodology going into the signing, but that they had their own reasons for being motivated to close. And that if Sterling Harbor were to approach the table again, under different conditions, with a different structure, he would not dismiss the conversation. Ethan was quiet. You're thinking about re-engaging, he said. I'm thinking about what the right thing is, she said. Which is not the same thing I was thinking about 14 months ago when Marcus first brought me this deal. I was thinking about what the impressive thing was. What would make the board feel confident in me? What would prove something? Another pause. The program serves 4,000 kids. That's a concrete, measurable thing. And if there's a version of this acquisition that gets done correctly, independently valued, fully disclosed, structured so that Sterling Harbor's healthcare division is actually built to sustain it, then maybe the 14 months weren't wasted. They were just misdirected. He thought about what to say to that. He thought about Margaret's voice, the way she used to talk about her work, the particular seriousness she brought to the question of whether a thing was being done right, not just done. He thought about Lily's question on that first day. 4,000 is a lot of kids. That's a reasonable way to think about it, he said. I'm not asking for your approval, she said, and there was something in the tone, not hostile, more like a correction of a misunderstanding before it could take root. I'm telling you because you should know, because you're the reason the first version of this fell apart, and if there's a second version, you should know it's happening. I appreciate that. And also, a pause. And also because I think your wife's work deserves to be part of what the second version looks like. I've been reading her documentation more carefully. The compliance framework she was building, the way she traced the holding structures, that's exactly the kind of analysis that should have been done on this deal from the beginning. I'd like to have it formally incorporated into the investigation record, with proper attribution. He was quiet for long enough that she said, Cole? Yeah, he said. Sorry, He stopped. He looked at the school entrance. A few kids were starting to come out now, backpacks bobbing, the small controlled chaos of end-of-school day. That would mean a lot, he said. To me. And, yeah, it would mean a lot. I thought it might. She sounded for the first time in their brief acquaintance like a person who was slightly uncertain of herself, not in a bad way, but in the human way. The way you sound when you've done something you hoped was right and are not entirely sure how it's going to land. I'll have Daniel reach out to your attorney about the formal process. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. It's the accurate thing to do. A pause, and he could almost hear her almost smile. I've been trying to do more of those. After they hung up, he sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before the bell rang. He thought about accuracy. He thought about the difference between doing the right thing and doing the accurate thing, and whether those were the same thing or just frequently adjacent. He thought about a woman he'd never met who had sat at a desk and followed a thread because it was there to be followed, because the question was there to be answered, because that was how she was. The bell rang. Kids poured out of the doors. He got out of the car. The emergency board session of Sterling Harbor produced, over the course of 3 contentious and reportedly very long meetings in November, a set of decisions that restructured the company's executive oversight framework in ways that Daniel Rest later described to Ethan, with his characteristic understatement, as substantial. Marcus Hale's departure had left a vacancy that the board filled on an interim basis with an outside hire, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had spent 12 years in financial compliance at a level that made Daniel visibly relieved every time her name came up. The compliance department was restructured so that its reporting lines ran directly to the board's audit committee rather than through the CFO's office. A new external review protocol was established that required independent verification for any transaction above $250 million. Raymond Holt remained on the board. This was the decision that Victoria had the most complicated feelings about, and she said so to Ethan in their second phone call, 6 weeks after the first. He didn't know, she said. Daniel is confident he didn't know about the specifics, and you can make the argument that his relationship with Marcus created a blind spot that was inappropriate for someone in his position, but, she sighed, removing every person who had a blind spot would leave me running this company alone. Including you, Ethan said. A pause. Including me. Yes. She didn't say it defensively, she said it the way she'd been saying most hard things in their conversations. Directly, a little flatly, the way someone speaks when they've decided that the performance of not being affected by something costs more than it's worth. For what it's worth, Ethan said, people who know they had a blind spot are significantly less dangerous than people who don't. That's a low bar. It's a starting point. She was quiet for a moment. Raymond asked about you, she said. He wanted to know your background. I told him what I knew, which is not that much. What did he say? He said, and I'm quoting, "A former SEAL with a dead wife and a 6-year-old walked in here and did what our entire legal and compliance infrastructure failed to do. I'm going to need a few days with that." Ethan said nothing. I think that was his version of respect, Victoria said. Probably. He's not an easy man. No. Neither are you, she said. And before he could respond to that, she moved on to the reason she'd called, which was to tell him that the regulatory body had formally opened its investigation into the Meridian Bridge transaction and that Patricia Osei had been contacted for a preliminary interview. He already knew. Patricia had told him that morning, but he let Victoria tell him anyway, because she'd called to tell him, and some things are worth letting people say. He told Lily about Margaret's name being in the official record on a Sunday morning in December, 3 weeks before Christmas. They were making pancakes, a Sunday ritual that had evolved over the past 2 years from a disaster of flour and cracked shells on the floor into something that still involved some floor spillage but was now at least intentional in its construction. Lily was standing on her step stool, stirring the batter with more enthusiasm than technique, and Ethan was watching to make sure the bowl didn't walk itself off the counter, and he said it in the middle of this, just said it, the way you say things to kids that you want them to have as a real thing rather than a formal announcement. The people investigating the case we were working on, he said, they're going to include your mom's research in the official record, with her name on it. Lily kept stirring. The spoon went around and around. In the investigation? Yeah. Like, they'll write her name down? Officially? Officially, on a legal document. She thought about this. The batter got thicker as she worked it. So people will see her name. Some people. The people who work on the case. And they'll know she did the work? They'll know she did the work. Lily stopped stirring. She looked at the bowl for a moment, at the way the batter moved slowly back after the spoon stopped. Then she looked at Ethan with an expression that was very serious and also trying very hard not to be something else. "That's good," she said. "Right? That's a good thing?" "Yeah," he said. "That's a good thing." She nodded and went back to stirring. After a moment, she said, "She would have been really good at it, being in the record." He had to look at the pan for a second. She really would have. "She was good at important things," Lily said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who has been told something enough times to believe it truly. "That's what you always say." "That's what I always say," he agreed. "Is it true?" "Yeah," he said. "It's true." She stirred for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Can we put chocolate chips in?" "We always put chocolate chips in." "I know. I just like asking." He got the chocolate chips from the cabinet. He measured out the right amount and handed her the measuring cup, and she poured them in with the careful, slightly too slow precision of a child who is aware that she is doing something important. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah." "Do you think the lady, Victoria, do you think she's going to be okay?" He considered this seriously, because Lily's questions generally deserved serious consideration. He thought about the 2 phone calls. He thought about the version of Victoria Sterling who had sat on the edge of her desk and said 14 months into the middle distance, and the version who had called him on a Thursday to tell him about Margaret's name going into the record before it was required of her, before anyone would have noticed if she hadn't. "I think she's going to be different," he said. "Whether different and okay end up being the same thing," he shrugged. "That's going to take time." Lily accepted this. "Are we going to see her again?" "Probably. There's still work to do on the case." "Will you tell me when?" "Sure." "I want to tell her about the wishing thing," Lily said. "The fountain in the lobby. She should know you can make wishes in it." He looked at her. "Who says you can make wishes in it?" "Me," Lily said simply. "I made one while we were in there. When the security guys were being mean," she said, "when everyone was looking at you and I couldn't do anything, I made a wish." He was quiet. "What did you wish for?" She looked at the batter. "I wished it would work out," she said, "and it did. So the fountain works." He stood at the counter in the December morning kitchen and looked at his daughter stirring pancake batter on her step stool, and felt something move through him that he couldn't have named precisely if someone had asked him to. Something that was partly grief and partly the specific, unearned gratitude of a man who has looked at his life and found, in the middle of the hard and the lost, something that held. "Yeah," he said. It did. So, the second conversation between Victoria Sterling and David Chen happened in January, in a conference room on the 39th floor of Sterling Harbor's building, with an independent valuator's report sitting in the center of the table and Sandra Okafor present for the duration. Ethan was not in the room. He knew it was happening because Patricia had been informed of the date as a formality. The Cole Family Trust's right of review period had technically expired, but Victoria had extended a professional courtesy in the form of a brief email to Patricia the week before, and Patricia had forwarded it to Ethan with a one-line note. She didn't have to do this. He read the email in his car, outside the pharmacy where he'd stopped to pick up Lily's vitamin prescription, and he sat there for a moment with the phone in his hand and the engine running and thought about the distance between where things had started and where they were now. Not the legal distance, not the transactional arc, but the human distance, the way people move toward and away from their better selves under pressure, and how you could never really predict the direction until you were already in the middle of it. He thought about the morning at the receptionist desk, the way Dana had looked at him, the way Marcus had looked at him, that quick dismissal, that confident misassessment. He thought about what it would have been like to have simply been what he appeared to be, a man in a worn jacket with a sealed envelope and no leverage, asking for 5 minutes of someone's time. He thought about the fact that for most of that morning, nobody in the building had known the difference, and the way they'd behaved toward him had had nothing to do with what he was carrying and everything to do with what he looked like carrying it. He'd expected that. He'd planned for it. But expecting something and experiencing it were not the same. And he was honest enough with himself, had always tried to be, even when it was uncomfortable, to acknowledge that it had cost him something. Not his composure, not his purpose, but something quieter and more personal. The small, involuntary hurt of being made to feel invisible in front of his daughter in the building where he'd come to do the right thing. He thought about Lily making a wish at the fountain she couldn't actually reach, while the security guards had their hands on him and she couldn't do anything else. His phone rang. He picked up without looking. "Dad? Hey, I'm at the pharmacy." "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" Lily said. "Breakfast for dinner, pancakes." "We had pancakes Sunday." "Sunday pancakes and Wednesday pancakes are different." "How are they different?" "Sunday ones are morning. Wednesday ones are at night, completely different." He put the car in reverse. "Fine. With chocolate chips?" "Obviously with chocolate chips." "Okay," she said, satisfied. "I'll set the table." He pulled out of the parking lot into the January dusk, the city going amber and cold around him, and drove home. Victoria's second deal with the Hargrove Group took 4 months to negotiate. It was valued at $610 million. The independent valuation was conducted by a firm with a 20-year track record that submitted its methodology for external peer review before delivering its report, which was a condition that Sandra Okafor had insisted upon, and that David Chen, to the surprised relief of Sterling Harbor's legal team, had accepted without significant resistance. The pediatric medical program was written into the acquisition terms as a protected entity, ring-fenced from any asset optimization review for a minimum of 7 years, with a dedicated endowment contribution from Sterling Harbor to offset its operational losses during the integration period. That part took a full week of separate negotiation, and it was the part that Victoria refused to compromise on. Daniel had suggested in the third week of talks that the 7-year protection window might be a point of flexibility if Chen pushed back. Victoria had said, "Then he pushes back," and that had been the end of that conversation. Chen did not ultimately push back. The deal closed on a Friday in late April. Ethan found out the way most people outside the building found out, through a press release that went out at market open, a spare corporate announcement about the completion of a major acquisition that mentioned expanded healthcare capabilities and said nothing about the 14 months that had preceded it, the investigation, the man in the worn jacket, or any of the rest of it. He read it on his phone over coffee, standing at the kitchen counter before Lily was awake. And then he put the phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the April morning coming in through the glass, the kind of early spring light that arrives before the warmth does, that makes the world look like it's reminding you it's still here. He finished his coffee. He started breakfast. When Lily came downstairs 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas and with one sock inexplicably missing, she found him at the stove and said, "What day is it?" "Friday." She climbed onto her chair. "Good Friday or bad Friday?" "Regular Friday," he said. "Better than most." She considered this. "Can we do something after school?" "Sure. What do you want to do?" "I want to go back to that building," she said. "The one with the fountain, and make another wish." He turned from the stove and looked at her. "The first one already worked." "I know," she said. "This one is for something else." "What?" She thought about it with the gravity she brought to most important decisions. "I want to wish for a good year," she said, "for everybody." He looked at his daughter in her pajamas and her one sock, sitting at the kitchen table in the morning light with the seriousness of someone who has decided that wishing for a good year is a reasonable and necessary use of a wish. "Okay," he said. "We can do that." She nodded, satisfied, and reached for her orange juice. Outside the window, the April light stretched itself across the yard, unhurried, generous, doing what light does in the early spring, arriving before it's been asked for, staying longer than anyone expected. The Pediatric Medical Center reopened on a Thursday in September, 14 months after the morning Ethan Cole had walked into a building where nobody knew his name and everything had changed anyway. It was not a grand reopening in the way that corporate events sometimes are. No dramatic ribbon cutting staged for photographers. No catered reception with a keynote speaker. What it was, practically speaking, was a Thursday morning in a building that had been quietly renovated over the summer, where the waiting room now had better chairs and a working water fountain and a play area in the corner with actual toys rather than the 3-year-old magazines that had been there before. The staff came back to work. The intake system came back online. The first patient of the day arrived at 8:45, a 9-year-old boy named James with asthma and a mother who had been driving 40 minutes each way to a different facility since the center had gone into administrative limbo during the acquisition uncertainty. James sat in the new waiting room and looked at the play area and asked his mother if he could go over there, and she said yes, and he went. That was the reopening. That was most of what it was. Victoria was there. She stood near the entrance in her regular clothes, not a business suit, just dark pants and a jacket she'd owned for 3 years. And she watched James walk to the play area, and she didn't say anything to anyone about it. She just watched. Ethan arrived at 9 with Lily, who was in her second week of second grade and had been given permission to be late to school on the condition that she wrote about it afterward for her class journal. She'd agreed to this immediately and had been composing the journal entry in her head for 3 days. Victoria saw them come through the door. She raised her hand in a small wave, not the professional greeting she'd been giving to the program staff and the Hargrove integration team members who'd stopped by during the morning, but something less formal, the wave of a person who has been waiting for specific people to arrive. Lily spotted the play area before she spotted Victoria and looked at Ethan with barely contained urgency. "Go ahead," he said. She went. He watched her insert herself into the play area with the efficient social confidence of a 7-year-old who has spent enough time in waiting rooms to know how they work, and then he walked over to where Victoria was standing. "She's been talking about this place for a week," he said. "The center?" She heard Kids Medical Center and decided it was a place she needed to personally inspect. He watched Lily pick up a wooden puzzle and examine it with the expression of an expert evaluating the quality of a tool. "She's very thorough." Victoria almost smiled. "How is she?" "Good. She lost a tooth last month and negotiated a significant premium for it on the grounds that it was a molar." "Did it work?" "I paid $3. I don't know if that's market rate." "I have no idea what the market rate is," Victoria said. "I was an only child and both my parents were executives. My tooth fairy probably had a PowerPoint." He did laugh at that, a short, genuine laugh that surprised both of them a little. She looked mildly pleased by it. They stood side by side and watched the room. The staff at the intake desk processing the morning's first appointments, a nurse moving through with a tablet, a father in a construction vest sitting in the corner filling out forms with the focused concentration of someone who is not a fluent reader and is not going to let that stop him. The ordinary human texture of a place that helps people, doing the thing it was built to do. "The program director told me this morning they have full appointment capacity through October," Victoria said. "First month back." "People knew they could come back?" "We did outreach. 6 weeks of calls and community notifications before reopening. Sandra's team handled most of it." A pause. That was something Marcus's structure never would have done. The outreach. He would have called it inefficient. She said it without drama, just as a plain observation about a man who no longer worked at her company. "It was the most important thing we did." Ethan nodded. "The endowment contribution clears probate review in November," she said. "After that, the program is funded independently of the acquisition's performance metrics. Whatever happens to the division's numbers over the next 7 years, this place runs." "I know. Patricia keeps me updated." "I know she does." Victoria looked at the father in the construction vest, who had finished the form and was looking at it with the careful expression of a person reviewing their work. "I've been trying to understand something," she said, "about myself, about the whole 1.5 years before you walked in." He waited. "I think I had convinced myself that the deal was good because I needed it to be good," she said. "I needed it to be good because I needed the board to see that I could do this. And because I needed Marcus to be trustworthy because trusting him was easier than the alternative." She paused. "That's not an excuse, it's just, that's what I think happened. In my head, the story I was telling myself." She glanced at him. "Do you think I'm right about that?" "I think the story you tell yourself about why you do things is almost always partially right and partially convenient," he said. "And I think most people can't tell the difference until after." Did you always know the difference between the right call and the convenient one? He thought about the 2 years before Margaret's diagnosis, when he'd been running security contracts that took him away for weeks at a time, and he'd told himself he was building financial stability for his family and had not examined too closely whether that was the whole truth or just the part of the truth that required nothing of him. He thought about the months after she died when he hadn't opened the box on the shelf in her study because he told himself he was still grieving and hadn't examined whether grief was the whole reason or just the easiest one. No, he said. Not always. She nodded slowly. That's more honest than I expected. You asked an honest question. They were quiet for a moment. From across the room, Lily called out, Dad, this puzzle is missing a piece. Then do a different one. She considered this verdict, accepted it, and began dismantling the incomplete puzzle with efficient pragmatism. She's very practical, Victoria said. She gets it from her mother. Victoria looked at him. She did that sometimes. He'd noticed it in their phone calls. A brief pause before she responded to something that touched on Margaret, as though she was calibrating what space to give it. He appreciated that. He didn't always know what to do with people who either ignored it entirely or made too much of it, and she'd found some kind of middle register that worked. The investigation report is going to name Margaret's work formally, Victoria said. Daniel confirmed it last week. It'll be in the public version of the findings, not just the internal record. Whatever comes of the regulatory process, her name is in it. He'd known this was coming. Patricia had told him the week before. But hearing it said out loud in this particular room on this particular morning landed differently than it had on the phone. Thank you, he said. You don't need to keep thanking me for that. I know. He looked at the play area, at Lily starting on a new puzzle, her small face bent in concentration. I'm going to anyway. Victoria looked at the room again. She had the expression of someone who is present in a moment while also still carrying the weight of how much it costs to arrive here, and who has not yet fully figured out how to separate those two things. He recognized that expression. He'd worn it himself, in various forms, for the better part of 3 years. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. Before all of this, when you were running the company, before the acquisition, before any of this, were you happy with the work? She looked at him with mild surprise at the question. That's not what I expected you to ask. I know. Are you going to answer it? She thought about it genuinely, which was what he'd hoped she'd do. There were parts of it I loved, she said finally. The actual operational decisions, figuring out how to structure something, how to make 4,000 people's work fit together in a way that actually functions. I was good at that, and I knew I was good at it, and that felt real. A pause. But a lot of it was, she stopped. A lot of it was performing the role of a person who should be running this company rather than actually running it, and I didn't know the difference until the floor fell out. What does it feel like now? Harder, she said, and more real. She thought about it. Mostly harder. That's probably the right direction, he said. She looked at him. You're strange, she said, and it wasn't unfriendly. I mean, you're not what I expected you to be, either time. When you walked in, or now. What did you expect now? I don't know. Someone who wanted something. Recognition, maybe. Credit. Some people who do what you did usually want the story to be about them doing it. It's not about me, he said. It was never about me. I know that, she said. That's what's strange. He shrugged. It's just how it is. Margaret found it. You stopped it. The lawyers processed it. The program is open. He looked around the room, at James returning from the play area to sit with his mother, at the father in the construction vest now watching his phone with the particular tension of a man waiting for a call back from work, at the nurse at the intake desk asking someone's name with the specific warmth of a person who has been doing this long enough to know that the name matters. I delivered an envelope. That's the extent of it. That is not the extent of it, Victoria said, with enough conviction that he glanced at her. He didn't argue. He let it stand. The regulatory findings came down in October, a year and 2 months after the morning that started everything. Marcus Hale was formally charged with securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The charging documents ran to 47 pages and referenced, In the section establishing the investigative basis, a private financial compliance analysis compiled by Margaret Ann Cole, analyst, whose work had first identified the irregularities in the Meridian Bridge ownership structure in the months preceding her death. The reference was a single paragraph in a 47-page document. It was, in the context of the formal proceeding, a minor notational inclusion. It was also the most important thing Ethan had read in 3 years. He read it sitting at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, after Lily was asleep, in the quiet of a house that had gotten better at being quiet, not empty, not the kind of quiet that is just the absence of what used to fill a space, but the kind that belongs to the people in it, that has the shape of their actual lives. He read the paragraph 4 times. Then he closed the document on his laptop and sat there with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular. He didn't cry. He wasn't built for it in the obvious way. He'd always been the kind of person who processed things sideways, who felt the full weight of something only in moments of stillness when there was nothing left to do with it except hold it. He sat at the table and held it. Margaret had spent 4 months on this in the last year of her life. She'd sat at a desk in the room down the hall and worked through it with the patient, methodical attention that she brought to everything she cared about, and she had not finished it, and she had not known what would eventually happen to it, and she had done the work anyway. Not because she knew it would matter, because it was there to be done, and it was the right thing to do, and that had been enough for her. He sat at the table for a long time. Then he got up and washed his coffee cup and turned out the light and went to check on Lily, the way he did every night before he went to bed. Not because she needed it at 7, but because he needed it. That specific 30 seconds of standing in her doorway and watching her sleep, the simple, unreasonable relief of her being there, her being fine, her being his. She was sleeping with one arm thrown over the edge of the bed and her hair spread across the pillow in approximately 6 directions. The Purple Star sneakers were on the floor at an angle that suggested they'd been removed with great haste. He stood in the doorway for 30 seconds. Then he went to bed. Victoria called on a Wednesday morning 2 weeks after the charges were filed. He was dropping Lily at school when his phone rang, and he picked up and said, "Give me 2 minutes," and watched Lily run toward the entrance where her friend Abby was waiting, backpack bouncing, already mid-conversation before she'd arrived, and then he put the phone back to his ear and said, "Okay." "The board voted yesterday," Victoria said. "Holt is stepping down at the end of the fiscal year. Officially, it's a retirement." "Is it?" "There was a conversation," she said. "He made a decision. I'm not going to characterize it more than that." "Okay." "We're restructuring the board composition. 3 new independent members, including someone with a financial compliance background. Sandra recommended her." A pause. "I wanted you to know." "I appreciate it. I'm also—" She stopped. He'd learned, over the past several months of phone calls, that when Victoria stopped like that, mid-sentence, it was because she was editing toward honesty rather than away from it. He waited. "I'm making some changes to how I run things. Personally, not just structurally. I've been working with someone, a kind of advisor, not a therapist exactly, but someone who helps me think through decisions differently, who asks me the questions I'm not asking myself." "That's a good idea." "I know it is. I'm a little annoyed it took all of this for me to do it." She said it the way she said most things about herself, directly, without apology, with the particular lack of self-indulgence that he'd come to think of as her most genuinely distinctive quality. "She asked me something last week, my advisor. She asked me what I want Sterling Harbor to be in 5 years. Not financially. She wasn't interested in the numbers. She meant, what do I want it to actually be, as a place, as a thing that exists in the world?" "What did you say?" "I said I wanted it to be a company where someone like you doesn't have to spend 2.5 years trying to get an envelope through the door." A pause. She said that was a start. He sat in the parked car outside the school and looked at the building where his daughter had just disappeared through a door and felt, in the particular compressed way of a person who doesn't have the luxury of feeling things at full volume, the full weight of how far everything had traveled to arrive at this conversation. "That's a good start," he said. "It's just a start," she said. "I know that. Most things are." A pause. "Can I tell you something that I haven't told anyone else?" "Sure. The first morning, when you were in my office and you told me about your wife, about why you were carrying this, where it came from. She was quiet for a moment. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The specific fact that you spent 2.5 years carrying someone else's unfinished work through every official door that would open and a lot that wouldn't, because she was the kind of person who would have wanted it finished. A pause. I don't know if I would have done that. I'm honestly not sure. He didn't say anything immediately. He watched a sparrow land on the chain-link fence at the edge of the school parking lot, look around with the bright, assessing alertness of a sparrow, and then fly away. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that, he said finally. I was carrying it partly for her, but I was also carrying it because of the program, the kids. It would have been easier to just put the box back on the shelf, decide I'd tried enough. He paused. I thought about that option more than I'd like to admit. What kept you from taking it? He thought about that seriously. About Lily asking 4,000 is a lot of kids in the voice of a child who doesn't yet know how to make herself smaller in the presence of a problem. About Patricia, on the phone 18 months in, saying we can try one more channel. About the specific look of Margaret's handwriting on the cover page of the document in the box. The handwriting of a woman who wrote things down because she believed that written things persisted, that they existed in the world beyond the moment of their making. I didn't want it to be the story where someone did the work and it just disappeared, he said. Some things deserve to get finished. Victoria was quiet for long enough that he wondered if the connection had dropped. Then she said, Yeah, they do. Nah. There is a version of this story that ends neatly, that arrives at its conclusion with everything resolved, every person properly repositioned, every consequence allocated. In that version, the moral is clear and portable, and the last scene is designed to leave you feeling that the world is the kind of place where the right things happen to the right people with appropriate efficiency. That version is not accurate. What actually happened is less tidy and more real. Marcus Hale's legal proceedings extended for nearly 2 years, through continuances and filings and the slow machinery of a justice system that moves at the pace it moves, regardless of anyone's feelings about it. The outcome, when it came, was not what everyone who had wanted accountability had hoped for. Penalties, restrictions, a record, but not the full weight of consequence that the scope of what he'd done perhaps deserved. That's how these things often go. The law catches what it catches, and the rest continues to exist in the world as it has always existed, which is to say, imperfectly, incompletely, in the company of all the other things that didn't get fully resolved. Raymond Holt retired with the statement about his decades of service and his commitment to the company's future, and he meant some of it and not all of it, and that is also how these things go. Daniel Rest stayed on as head of legal and became, in the year following the investigation, significantly better at asking the questions he'd previously been too trusting to ask. He would never fully forgive himself for the compliance letters. He would live with it in the way professional people live with the mistakes they can't take back. Not at the surface, not always visible, but there, a permanent alteration in the geography of his judgment. Victoria Sterling went back to running her company, which was harder than it had been before and better, the way things are sometimes both at once. She made decisions she wasn't sure about, and some of them were wrong, and she found out, slowly, that being wrong about something and being bad at something were not the same thing, which was a lesson she'd known intellectually for years and was only now beginning to understand in the way that the body understands things, as a felt truth, not a stated one. She thought about Ethan Cole more than she would have predicted. Not romantically. That came later, gradually, in the slow and improbable way that two people who have been through something significant together sometimes find that they have more in common than the specific thing that brought them into the same room. But even before that, she thought about him as a kind of reference point. When she was in a meeting and someone was being dismissed before they'd finished speaking, she felt it in a way she hadn't before. When an assumption was being made about someone based on the wrong evidence, she noticed it. Small recalibrations, accumulated over months, the gradual re-education of a person who had been very good at reading surfaces and was now, with effort, learning to look differently. That's what one Tuesday morning left inside her. Not a dramatic transformation, not a clean redemption arc, just a different quality of attention, slowly earned. But the last time Lily visited the pediatric medical center, at least the last time that this story covers, she was 7 years and 4 months old, and she was there because her father had a follow-up meeting with the program director about the endowment terms. And she came along because Ethan's sister was unavailable, and because Lily, when given the option of going to the center or spending the afternoon at the neighbor's house, had chosen the center without hesitation. The puzzle might be fixed, she explained. It was. Someone had found the missing piece and taped a small note to the box that said complete, with a hand-drawn star, and Lily found this deeply satisfying. She completed the puzzle at a table in the waiting room while Ethan was in the meeting, and when he came out, she was sitting back in her chair looking at the finished thing with the expression of a person who has done what they came to do. Victoria had come by the center that afternoon. She did periodically, without announcement or ceremony, and she found them there as they were getting ready to leave, Lily sliding off her chair and pulling on her jacket with the focused effort of a child who has remembered that she has somewhere to be. "You finished it," Victoria said, looking at the puzzle. "It was easy once I had all the pieces," Lily said. She looked at Victoria with the direct, uncomplicated appraisal of a child who has decided she likes a person and is no longer doing anything as formal as evaluating them. "Did my dad tell you about the fountain?" "Which fountain?" "Downstairs, in your building." Lily picked up her backpack. "You can make wishes in it. I made one last year and it worked. I told him we should go do another one." Victoria looked at Ethan. He shrugged slightly, the shrug of a man who has learned to simply let his daughter's logic move through a room at its own pace. "What did you wish for the first time?" Victoria asked. "That it would work out," Lily said. She slung her backpack on. "And it did." "So?" She looked at Victoria with the direct simplicity of someone delivering a conclusion they are very confident in. "It works." Victoria crouched to Lily's eye level, not in the performative way adults sometimes do with children, but genuinely, just to be at the same height for a moment. "What are you going to wish for next time?" Lily thought about it with her characteristic seriousness. "A good year," she said. "For everybody." Victoria looked at her. Something in her face did the thing that Ethan had seen it do a handful of times over the past year. Went unguarded, briefly, in the way of a person who is in the presence of something simple enough that none of their usual management strategies apply. "That's a good wish," she said. "I know," Lily said, and she walked toward the door. Ethan looked at Victoria. She looked at him. There was no language adequate to the full weight of the year that stood between this moment and the morning he'd walked into her lobby with a worn jacket and a sealed envelope, and neither of them tried to find any. They didn't need to. They'd been through enough together to know that the important things don't always need to be said out loud. That sometimes it's enough to just stand in a room where something good has been preserved and let that be what it is. "We should go," he said. "Yeah," she said. "Go." He went. Outside, Lily was waiting on the sidewalk, looking up at the building with the assessing expression of a child considering the logistics of a wishing fountain visit. "Can we go do the wish now?" she said. "It's across town." "So yes?" He looked at her. 7 years old, backpack on, entirely certain. He thought about all the things that had to happen for the two of them to be standing on this sidewalk on this particular afternoon. The long, improbable chain of effort and accident and loss and work and stubbornness and luck. And how none of it had been guaranteed at any point along the way. How at dozens of moments it could have gone differently and hadn't. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go make a wish." She took his hand and they started walking, and the September afternoon moved around them the way September does. Neither warm nor cold. That in-between quality of a season that hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. The particular light of a day that has been used well and still has some hours left in it. That's all this is, in the end. Not a story about a hero, not a story about justice arriving cleanly on schedule. It's a story about a woman who compiled evidence that no one wanted to hear and did it anyway. About a man who carried it to the door because someone had to. About a CEO who had been looking at the wrong things and when the floor fell out, chose to look differently. About a company where 4,000 children a year can get the medical care they need. Not because anyone waved a hand and made it happen, but because a series of imperfect people made a series of hard, unglamorous choices over the course of more than 2 years. And at no point was any of it easy, and that is precisely the point. People want to believe that integrity is dramatic, that it announces itself, that it arrives in cinematic moments of clarity and costs the person who has it nothing they weren't prepared to pay. It doesn't work like that. Mostly, it looks like a man in a worn jacket in a lobby where nobody wants him, holding on to a sealed envelope for one more hour. Mostly, it looks like a woman at a desk at night, following a thread because it's there to be followed, because the question deserves an answer, because that's what you do when you believe that the truth is worth the work of finding it. Mostly, it looks like ordinary people choosing, over and over again, not to put the box back on the shelf. The wishing fountain was across town, and they went.